Hey guys, welcome back to the Art of Natural Beauty, episode number 6. Today I want to talk a little bit about some of the filters that I use for landscape photography. When you're shooting landscapes, especially with film, it's very important for you to control the tones and the range of stops that will be exposed on your film. The same could be said with digital photography as well, although there's many tricks to get around using ND filters and ND grad filters in digital photography, such as HDR and exposure blending and so on. But even in that case that you do have the ability to use other techniques in digital photography, using grad filters and ND filters will vastly improve your take-home image, so you're going to be a little bit more inspired when you begin to work on them in the digital darkroom. Now, as I said, for film, it's really essential when we're talking about landscape photography, because quite often when we are shooting a landscape and we're incorporating a foreground and a background, most of those backgrounds are going to contain a sky. They're going to be composed of a sky, some foreground subject matter, such as a beach, rocks, or what have you, or possibly some water, a lake, or a stream. So the dynamic range of most films is going to be somewhere around 5 stops, and that's certainly the case with color slide film. There's a little bit more latitude with color negative film, but generally what I shoot with is color slide. So I'm really trying to keep my dynamic range compressed into those 5 stops. And often I'm shooting in the area I'm in, I'm shooting around lakes, and I'm including a lot of sky in my compositions. So in order to keep all those tones compressed, because your skies and your waters would generally be 2 to 3 stops above your foreground in your actual landscape that you're photographing, we use a series of filters known as ND grad filters to try to tone down those areas that are a little bit brighter in the composition, to keep them within that latitude of the 5-stop range. So there's a number of companies that make filters out there that are great. I'm going to mention 3 of them, because those are the 3 that I have. And then I'll give you a run through of some of those, and then I'll give you some links, provide some links to those tools in the show notes. So let's talk a little bit about what ND is, neutral density, okay, because we've all heard that term. Neutral density reduces or modifies the intensity of all of the wavelengths of light in the color spectrum of light equally. And this is supposed to be done without change in hue of color rendition. So it grabs that light and it stops it down and controls it and filters it in a way that it will reduce an area of the image without causing any loss to the quality or the color and hue of that light. So there's a balance. So when you place a grad filter or an ND filter over your lens, all it's really reducing is the amount of light intensity that's going to be hitting your film or your sensor, not changing the color or hue or the quality of those wavelengths of light. So Lee Filters has been around for a long time, and they're one of the best filter companies, and they're the first one I'm going to talk about. And they have created a system that works really well with your cameras, and that's what you're going to see here on the Mamiya 7 II. So this is the Filter Dude cover, and I mentioned that in the episode when I talked about the Mamiya 7 II. And again, I'll put some links to Filter Dude products, because I think that it's a great alternative, great build quality, and a great price. And today it's great to have competitive markets and have options, because that's what keeps prices in check. So I'm a big fan of Filter Dude, so I'll give a link to that in the notes. But this is the filter cover that just protects the lens, because I like to keep all of my filter rings on my lenses at all times. And the same is said with my large format setup. I have the same setup for that as well. But these filter rings come in various millimeter settings depending on the threading of your lens. So you'll have to know what the threading is on your lens to accept a filter before you make a purchase of one of these rings. But they thread in and they stay on the camera at all times, and then I use this cover. So Lee came up with this system, which is their filter holders, and that's what this is, the filter holder here. And it just attaches and affixes to this ring on the outside of the lens. Now this this particular holder again is the Filter Dude system, which I purchased because again I like the price, I like the products, and I'm a big fan. But what you're going to see here on the front are kind of these two blocks that stick up. It might be a little bit hard. I'll see if I can lay that flat. You'll see those little blocks. And within these blocks, there are various regions, and you can extend these by adding more of these little slats and extending them out. But inside here are tracks for you to slide your filters into. So this one is set up for 2 filters. I really, in the work that I'm doing, I don't really see a need and haven't run across a need yet to stack more than 2 filters, but you certainly may find that you need to do that. And there's this little lever here in the bottom. You'll see it pulls in and out. And that will just attach to the outside of your lens ring. And now you've got the filter holder affixed to the lens ring. And you can rotate it, which is great because depending on what you're doing, you may have a need to rotate that angle of the horizon or the water line coming in from the shore of a lake or the ocean or what have you, depending on your composition. So it's great to have the ability to rotate because you may want to change that angle across your lens. So that will attach like so. Now the first filters, as I said, we'll talk about are the Lee filters. And I've got 3 of those for my kit. I've got, they come in 2 different sizes. They're 100 millimeters wide across. That's the standard for their kits. And they've got 3 different kits. They've got for full frame, they've got for larger medium format cameras, and they've got a setup for micro four thirds and smaller cameras. But I've got the 100 millimeter set. And they're either going to come in 4" by 4" square or 4" by 6". And I've got the 4" by 6" here. It's just a little bit easier to work with and hold these when you're sliding them in and out of the filter holder. And the 3 that I have picked up are the 0.9 ND, which is a 3-stop, and that's a hard grad, the 0.6 ND hard grad, and the 0.6 ND soft grad. And these are all graduated filters. They're not a full ND, they're graduated, a gradient filter. And what that means is, and I'll open one up and show it to you, but a gradient filter will start on the bottom to be completely neutral and have no stoppage of light whatsoever. And then it will have a hard point that it will it'll come to a grad, a little bit of a gradation in the center of the filter here, and then it will be dark on the top. So with a soft grad, this progression of the graduation from the center moving upwards is going to be a little bit of a softer line. It will be less of a hard gradient when it drops in. And that may be useful for if you've got, say, some mountain tops or some trees that are along the horizon and you don't want to completely have a hard stop right there in the center of your horizon. What I found with using the hard grads is that you really don't see a line anyway represented in there unless you've done something really intense, like pulled it very far down into the frame and you're covering a lot of your foreground. Then you're going to see something like that. But if it's along the horizon, generally it's very neutral. It's a very neutral transition, and you don't really notice much of that. Some of my images, you will see that in the very tops of like some trees along the shoreline. And, you know, it doesn't really bother me that much because typically in my workflow, I'll work in somewhat of a vignette to keep the eye going towards the area of interest. But at any rate, this will be placed inside the filter holder like so, into these two grooves. And then that will be brought down until it comes to the horizon or the area that you want to affect, that you want to control and tone down by a couple stops. And, you know, again, generally this will be a horizon line with the sky along the landscape or the water's edge. When you're placing them into the holder like this, I've actually, since this is a rangefinder camera and I'm not actually looking through the lens, I don't have the ability to stop down my lens and actually see where my gradient line is. Now with large format, you can do that, and that's exactly what you want to do. When you want to compose your shot, you want to have your aperture open to its maximum aperture so you can see to compose on your ground glass. And then you want to stop down your lens to whatever f-stop you're going to be shooting at and check this line here, and you'll be able to see it through the ground glass, through the lens, and make sure that that is placed where you want it to be placed on your horizon. If not, you may be encroaching somewhat into your foreground, and if you're encroaching too much, you will notice it, and that's happened to me a couple times in the past, and I've learned a couple tricks to get around that. But with the rangefinder system here, you don't look through the lens, so you're not going to see where that is. But in your viewfinder, you've got some various markings in the setup, so you can see where the center of your viewfinder is. You can see the top third, or the top quarter. It's broken down into quarters. So you get the top quarter, a middle quarter, the center, and then the bottom quarter. The two middle quarters in the bottom quarter. It's broken into 4 quadrants with lines. So you can line that up when you're doing your composition, and then you can mimic what you're seeing on the front with these handy little markers. And I'll provide a link to these markers that you can add to your filter system if you would like to do that. They're helpful even if you're shooting shooting with a large format or with a TTL camera where you're looking through the lens and you can still see it. But it's helpful just to have when you're setting the filter in front, even if for a basis when you start. So you'll set the filter in and you'll line that up, and depending on the filter you've chose, this was the 2-stop hard grad. Generally that's what I'm shooting with because the sky isn't too much more over 2 stops in most of my compositions. I don't generally shoot into the sun. I used to do that when I first started out. You know, everybody loves to chase that beautiful color and the sun dipping into the horizon, into the lake, into the ocean, and that may be something that that you really like to do, and that's fine. I don't generally shoot into the direction of the sun anymore. I use the sun as my light, as my key light for my landscape or my subject, as I would with the light that's lighting me right here. So I don't have quite as much dynamic range to compress because I'm not shooting at the sun. So 2 stops is generally good for me, but I do also have the 3-stop hard grad, and then I've got, as I mentioned, the 2-stop soft. Generally, again, this is the one I'm going to use. So these are the Lee filters. These are all resin filters, a dyed resin filter. And Lee, again, is very reputable. They've been around for a long time. They make great stuff. So highly recommend you getting some of these. So we'll put this one off to the side, and then we'll get some of the other filters out. And I always keep a lens cloth in there, because you never want to handle these filters directly with your fingers. You'll leave fingerprints all over them, and you will see that when you expose your film. And I also keep my rocket blower around with me and just blow off any of the dust or hair or anything that lands on these as well before I put them in. And the same can be said with the lens. And that's just a great practice. You want to reduce anything that's going to be on your lens that's going to cause more work for you in the digital darkroom to remove those. If you can have the most pristine image possible, that's the way to go. So those are the Lee filters. And then I've got another filter here, and this is from Signray. And I bought this when I was shooting digital more so early on. And this particular filter is the Daryl Benson Reverse Grad ND, and it's a 3-stop reverse grad. So what that means, this will come in handy for what I just talked about a bit ago. So if you're somebody that's chasing sunsets and that's what you're looking for, this filter will come in handy. Or even if if you're shooting somewhat in the general direction of the sun. Typically, the horizon, here's the horizon line. The horizon is going to be your brightest area of your composition in most cases. Your foreground is going to be your darkest. And then as you move away from the horizon up into the sky, further away from the sun, it's going to begin to darken off a bit gradually. So what they came up with here, Signray came up with, was this reverse grad. And the reverse grad in this case is a 3-stop. So that means that here in the center band, it's 3 stops of ND reduction. At the bottom, it's neutral. It's a bit of a hard grad into it. And then it tapers back off about a stop or so as it goes up towards the top of the filter, which would be the top of your skyline. So that's going to allow for a bit of a softer graduation as you get back into these darker tones that are higher away from the brightest aspect, which is your horizon, where the sun typically will be setting, and give it a little bit more of a neutral transition towards the top of the frame of your photograph. So this comes in handy again if you want to shoot sunsets or the sun dipping into the water, or more so into the direction of the sun. Again, I really don't use this anymore. I don't shoot into the sun anymore. So it kind of sits there, but I keep it just in case I may change my mind and want to do something. It doesn't hurt to have more tools on hand than you use. So that is the second company. And then the third is Format High Tech. And these guys are out of the UK. Lee Filters is out of the UK. Signray, I believe, is out of California. And this is the newest filter I've picked up right here. What's cool about Format High Tech is they've come up with a new coating that they're using on their ND filters. And I should mention that this is not a graduated ND filter. This is a full ND filter. So with a full ND filter, there's no graduation. The complete filter is designed to reduce light across the spectrum, all evenly uniform across your composition. So this is a 3-stop ND. And they are using what they call a Firecrest technology. And what that is, instead of a dyed resin, they're using rare earth metals for a coating. And they're in their words, they call it a hyper neutral ND filtration. So why would you want that? Well, because when you're stacking filters, like we talked about how there's more than one slot on here, you can add 4 slots. You can increase the number of slots on the front of this, and you would stack filters. So why would you want to stack filters? If you don't have enough ND to reduce the number of stops in your image to give you what you need to make your exposure, or if you want to increase the length of time that your shutter is open so you can have a long exposure. So for an artistic effect, say, if you want to photograph clouds and you want some movement in those clouds, or water or something that's going to be moving, you're going to want to keep your shutter open longer. Now you're not going to be able to do that with bare glass, because it's going to, your exposure is going to be directly linked to what your meter is telling you for the f-stop you've chosen, and the film speed that you have, or the shutter speed, or the ISO that is dialed into your camera if it's a digital camera. So if you want to get dramatic effects and keep your shutter open for much longer periods of time, you're going to want a full ND filter in place. Now, that's going to be great because it's going to leave your shutter open longer, but you're still going to be faced with the difference in dynamic range of your sky or water, or something that's brighter in the composition. So you would place your ND filter in first, and then you would stack up over the top of that a grad ND filter to control that area of your composition that needs to be brought down tonally into the dynamic range that your film is able to handle. So you have a uniform and a pleasing uniform exposure. So you would, like I said, you'd stick that in there, you'd double up the filter, and you would be set to go. So this is a 3-stop filter in here. This is a 4x4 filter. It's not as long as, it's not 6 inches like these are. But that's all that they offer for their full ND filters, high-tech, Format Hi-Tech. So they've got several different, they've got anywhere available from 1 to 10 stops in this filter. And then they've got 2 other filters that are equivalent to what Lee calls their big stop filter. And those are 13 and 16 stops. So, you know, you're shooting black and white. You may be shooting in the middle of the day. You may be shooting at noon, 1 o'clock, where the sun is high and it's the brightest time of the day. And you really want to, you want some dramatic movement in your photograph. In black and white, it's not going to matter as much because you want contrast and shadows in the image. So you can go out and shoot in the middle of the day. With color photography, it's not as pleasing and desirable to do so. So you're going to wait for that sun to be at a much greater azimuth and be filtering, getting that red light filtered through instead of that blue light that you get from overhead. As the sun, moves down towards the horizon, it's going to take much longer for it to bend and come through the Earth's atmosphere. So you're getting a different spectrum of light. And that's what we determine to be pleasing to the eye. It's softer, shadows aren't as harsh, and that's generally what you're looking for. But if you're shooting black and white, as I mentioned, you may be shooting in the middle of the day. And you may need more than 10 stops. You may need 13, 16 stops. You may want to double those up. So that's great. So again, with this Format Hi-Tech filter, with the Firecrest coating, this is designed to be completely neutral. And when I mean completely neutral, when you're stacking these filters, they will not give a color cast, a magenta color cast. If you're stacking some other filters that aren't quite as reputable, Lee, is being one of the top filters available, you can still get a bit of a magenta color cast when you stack several of these filters together. And that's just going to show up in your final image. You can color correct for that in post. But if you can, factor that out of the equation and not have to deal with it, then that's what you want to do. You want to have the best optically pleasing, well-exposed, well-balanced image that you can get to start with, to work from, and not spend as much time and run into frustrations when you're working in the digital darkroom. So that would be my recommendation, is if you're going to stack filters, is to go with the Format Hi-Tech filters. And you can stack these Lee filters on top of that and not have any of a color cast issue, because it's more induced when you're stacking the Lee brands or some of these other brands together, where you're going to see that color cast. So those are those filters. And then I carry and this is for my large format system, I carry a 2-stop polarizer, circular polarizer. And this one was by Heliopan, and it's a big bulky filter, and it's a 105 millimeter circular polarizer. That does not fit on this camera. I do have a hood system that can hook up to it, and that's what I do on the large format camera to affix this to the lens, because I just don't have a threading for that. I figured I'd get an easy method to do so, and that's what I'll show you this this hood in a second, and that's how I do it. But the Mamiya system has a specialized filter system that goes with it. And when that's placed on the lens, it will allow you to flip it up so you can look through it and with your eye adjust the type of polarization that you want, and then flip it back down over the lens. This isn't made for this system. It's something that's unique. The system for the Mamiya is unique to this camera alone. So again, I use this on my 4x5, my Ebony 4x5, and you know, polarizer. Basically, what a polarizer will do is, by turning the filter, will either increase the blueness of your sky or blue subjects in your landscape, or it will cut through reflections. So if you want to photograph water and you want to see the stones and different you know, things underneath the water surface, you're going to want to have a polarizer in there. It'll reduce the glare, the reflection, and it gives a really kind of cool silky wet look to your composition, but allows you to see through the surface of that reflection of the water. So that's the other filter that I have. And then the last component I'm going to show you here is it's made by Lee again, and it's the wide angle lens hood. And this I use primarily with my 4x5 setup. And so this has the filter holder already affixed to the back of it to fit your rings in whichever ring that you've chosen for the lens, with the threading on the front of your lens. And then in the front, it's got a 105 millimeter thread here. And that is where I affix my polarizer. And when it's on there, then I can rotate the polarizer and I can see that through my ground glass. So this is great because it holds the filter, but it also provides a lens shade for large format lenses, which don't come with the lens shade. And you know, I used to use this quite a bit. Again, I don't really shoot into the sun anymore, so I don't really use this as often unless I'm using the polarizer on it. But a neat little piece to have nonetheless. Folds up real nice and travels in your kit really well. So I'll put links to all this stuff in the show notes. But that's, I guess that's really about all I wanted to talk about today regarding the filters that I use in my kit. I don't have a filter case that I keep them all in separately. I've been looking at a couple, and I've got some ideas of something that I might want to pick up in the future. I just haven't done that yet because I usually use the 6.6 two-stop hard ND grad, and then that high-tech 3-stop full ND on top of each other. So it's usually just 2 filters I'm using, but you know, you may want to have a filter kit to keep them all in and labeled, and a bag like that may reduce the size of your filter kit somewhat. So something to look at. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up now, and just wanted to say thank you for watching, and go out and look at some of these filters. It's going to vastly improve your photography, and if you're a film shooter, it's an essential. It's something you're going to have. One more note on filters: they do have a shelf life, so there's a stamp on them, and after a time period, they're not as relevant anymore, and they're not going to actually provide the specs that they're meant to do. So keep an eye on that. Make sure that your filters are all up to date, and they're going to give you the results that they're meant to give. So again, thanks for watching, and until next time, enjoy the art of natural beauty. If you like the content of this channel, or my large and medium format landscape photography, and would like to contribute to my endeavors, you can do so by heading over to jasonrobertjones.com/patron and clicking on the link. Or you could click on the Patreon link in the banner above on this channel. As always, thank you for your support and enjoy the art of natural beauty.